So this is a cracking early season pattern, a March brown, which is one of those insects that just gives you a bit of hope at the start of the fly fishing season when you start to see a few flies coming down the river. And this is more than likely one of the first things that you're going to see. It's a very simple pattern to tie, but it's so effective. It's in the mayfly family, so you know the kind of profile of it is similar to an awful lot of other flies. I'm just going to show you the materials that we're going to use. So in the vise I've got a size 12 dry fly hook. This is a Hanak 130 BL. Can tie this in 14s as well, and you need to make a judgment when you start to tie these flies about what sort of size the actual insects are coming down your river, because that will dictate obviously whether you're tying them in the right sizes or not. I tie these in 12s and 14s. My tying thread is a bog standard Uni 80 brown thread, and I'm just going to catch on. As I say, this is quite a simple fly to tie. There are a couple of little complicated bits, as there always are, but it's not too difficult, and a bit of perseverance you can get some really quite nice patterns. Just going to lay down a bed of thread along the shank of the hook, and the first thing that's going to go in is the tailing material. Now for this you can use just something like a partridge hackle, which is one of the traditional ways of doing it, but I quite like to use a pheasant tail feather, and I'm going to drag out 3 fibres like so, and I'm just going to catch those into the shank of the hook and adjust the length afterwards. So just attach those there and just shorten it down a wee bit. You're looking for kind of roughly the length of the hook, doesn't matter too much. Just make sure that's nice and secure to the top of the hook. Just going to throw a loop of thread underneath, which just helps to kind of make that tail pop a little bit. Now what I don't want to do is crowd the top of the hook here, because I'm going to have a couple of materials going in here in a minute, so it's quite important to leave yourself a bit of room to work. Just get rid of those spare fibres there. And then I'm just going to take my thread back to the middle, and I'm going to tie in a thread rib. Now you can use wire, but I quite like this, so that the actual insect has a very dark thorax with a very clear segmentation. And I'm going to use this Wisp thread, which is just a sort of pale creamy colour, to form that rib, which I'll bring up later. Just catch that in with my tying thread. Go all the way back down to where the tail joins, and just pop that in my baits, in my spring, retaining spring, to keep it in one place. Okay, so that's kind of the base of the fly sorted. Now I'm going to take my thread back and leave myself about, I suppose, 8mm there, and I'm now going to tie in a couple of CDC feathers. I'm using Natural Grey, and what I'm going to use is basically 3 feathers, so you're looking for 3 about the same size. And I'm going to line up the tips. Actually probably use that one, that's a bit nicer. It's always a bit of an adventure this, isn't it, trying to find the right sort of CDC feathers. Line up the tips so they're nice and straight like so, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to tie them in facing towards the hook eye rather than towards the bend. Now the reason for that is that the way that the natural fly sits on the water's surface, the wing kind of goes back that way. So what I'm going to do is tie them the opposite way and then fold them back, so you get that kind of upright feel to it. I'm just going to measure my feathers. So what I'm looking for again is the length of the hook, so just shorten that down a wee bit. Just a little bit more. Then introduce them to the top, pinch and loop. I think I can probably get away with a little bit more. Don't want the wings to be too high. It starts to get a bit unwieldy and tricky to manage then. That's about right, I think. So a couple of turns to secure those to the top of the hook, a couple in front, and then I'm just going to take my tying thread down the length of the feather to about halfway point on the hook, and then come in with my scissors and do a horizontal cut like so. Don't worry too much about all the poking out bits, just get rid of those. Now I'm going to form a thread body. You can use dubbing for this, But I quite like the sort of the slenderness of this thread body. It just feels to me like it's more like the real insect. Once you get to a point where you've got a little bit of a taper on that fly, I'm then going to bring up my thread. So just nice even turns of thread to form that segmentation. Six, 7 turns, that should do us nicely, and just tie that off with my tying thread and trim it away. Not putting anything on the body there at all really, just to keep that in place. Next thing is a hackle. Now again, everything here is brown, this included, and I'm just using a bit of a sort of a rooster cape here, which is just the perfect colour for this. And I'm taking a feather from the bottom part of the centre of the cape, which is where they're smallest, because I want to try to match the length of the hackle with the length of the CDC feathers. So I just plucked out one feather. I'm going to strip back the bottom parts, the barbs, just clip those off and just take away the last few to expose just the little point of that hackle. And I'm now going to tie it in. Just have to be a bit delicate here. I'm going to lay it on the back side of the hook. I'm going to do a couple of turns behind the hackle, then just fold that hackle back and a couple in front, just to secure that, just the very point of that cock hackle in place. I'm just going to trim off that end piece so it doesn't get in the way of the eye of the hook. Okay, pair of hackle pliers. Just grab the end of that hackle and I'm going to do 2 turns behind the wing, 1, 2, and then I quite like a couple of diagonal ones, so in front and behind, and the same again. And once you're there, you can then just use your tying thread to secure that in place. Okay, I will tidy that up in a second, so don't worry about the fact it's all kind of bushy and poking out in all directions at the moment. Just very carefully clip off my hackle. Right, we're nearly there. So using my thumb and forefinger of my right hand, I'm a left-handed tyer, I'm just going to sweep all of those fibres back towards the back of the fly and then throw in a couple of turns of thread just to keep everything facing backwards. That's a little bit too much actually. I don't want it to be like a pure F fly, I want it to kind of be sitting up a little bit like that. So that's kind of in the right direction. Now the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a little bit of spiky dubbing to the front end of this fly, and for that I'm going to use some fox squirrel, which is lovely short and spiky dubbing. Just going to dub some of that onto my thread. Not too much. Again, fold that back a little bit and start to just create that head area. And you can start to see where that's now sort of kicking backwards a wee bit, which is exactly what you want it to look like. You could probably just get away with a little bit more of the fox squirrel dubbing. Few turns, just fold that CDC back so you're just kicking it back towards the bend of the hook, and then give yourself room to do a whip finish. That's perfect. Okay, whip finish tool coming in. I tend not to varnish these. I'm trying to avoid the weight on the front of the fly. Now the last part of the process is totally up to you. So there's the kind of the finished fly, if you like. You know, you can see it's the perfect sort of profile for a March brown, a mayfly type pattern with its tail and the upward wing. But we have here underneath these fibres from the hackle. Now, if you fish it like this, the fly will tend to fall over and land on its side, which is absolutely fine. But if you trim it away and give it a sort of a more leggy feel, like so, what you'll find is it sits a bit more upright. So you just have to make a judgment call as to what you want on the day. And actually in my fly box, I tend to have some with longer legs and some with shorter ones to give you the option. So that's my version of the marsh brown, a cracking early season pattern. As you can see, quite simple to tie, a couple of tricky processes, not too bad. I hope if you have a go, it gives you some success and it gets you 1 or 2 early season fish to rise.